Cycling for me has never been about the bikes. They've only ever been the prerequisite tool. I do not see just a bike race, I see riders on heroic journeys and warriors doing battle. At one point, cycling was the most popular sport in Europe because newspapers told magnificent tales about epic races and crafted the great champions into legends. But with the advent of television, cycling lost some of its mystique, and that golden age of journalism and narration has perished. So now let us try to return some romance to the beautiful sport. Let us praise and give glory to phenomenal performances to be remembered for decades to come. Let us dwell on the moments that inspire and move us. Let us chronicle the rise and fall of heroes. Let us chart these life-changing journeys, these cycling odysseys. All right, welcome back to another episode of Cycling Odysseys. I'm your host, Patrick Santino. Today, we are recapping opening weekend, as I say, but the British people, they all say opening weekend. So, anyways, it was good, pretty good, great. I don't know. It's kind of tale of two races a bit, or three races actually, because I do the women's as well. I forgot about that. So, anyways, Adam Blythe and Rob Hatch brought up on their commentary basically which is better of the two, and Rob Hatch, traditional, is in love with Omloop. Sorry, I always say Omloop instead of Omloop. I know it's Omloop, but I always just say Omloop because I don't know. That's how I first learned it. Whatever. And I interchanged throughout this thing too. I was actually kind of aware of that, but I couldn't stop myself. And so anyways, Rob Hatch and Adam Blythe, they were the commentators for Eurosport on GCN, GCN on Kuurne-Brussels-Kuurne on Sunday. And Rob Hatch was in love with Omloop, basically. I don't think he actually said that, but then Adam Blythe definitely said, I'm all about KBK. I love Kuurne. I love it. And I was starting to get what he was saying for the past couple of years, having watched, I don't know, probably 8 or 7 editions of Kuurne. All right. After last year especially, and then after this year following it up, I get the hype that Adam Blythe is talking about. I get it, but I expanded on it and gave a full kind of talk about it here with an interlude about the winners of Omloop itself because, I don't know, especially for the men, it was pretty significant gauntlet throwing downish performance. So with that, let's jump into it and I'll say more after. '22 opening weekend. Which is the better classic of the opening weekend? Well, after 2 years in a row of nice sunny weather for opening weekend, we are all starting to realize a nasty and dirty secret and a half. Omloop Het Nieuwsbald might be one of the most highly anticipated races on the calendar, but nasty and dirty weather is necessary for that one to be a real ferocious heavyweight belter of a race. And surely we are all starting to come around the reality that though Omloop will always be the more anticipated of the two, for it is the official start of the road season, maybe Kuurne-Brussels-Kuurne is low-key the better classic. Omloop had twice as many chances to outdo Kuurne, and neither topped it as both played out in a similar fashion. I'll bet women's cycling is a different beast compared to the men's. The ladies first. All the way to the Kapelmuur, with already less than 20 kilometers to go, the peloton of favorites had been whittled down, but the group was still big enough to be called a peloton. The iconic Kapelmuur broke both legs and wills of the pretenders, and the breakaway of 4 was finally reeled in. But over the top, the heaviest favorites were still all together. It was not until the final climb, the Bosberg, that a real race-winning selection was made by Movistar's Annemiek van Vleuten. She bossed up the final climb as if she had been in total control of the race the entire time. The only one who could follow and hold her wheel was Team SD Works' Demi Vollering. Over the top of the Bosberg, the leading duo's lead started to balloon, for Van Vleuten still seemed as fresh as a daisy. Over the course of those last 13 kilometers, Vollering contributed somewhat to the pacemaking, but it was Van Vleuten that did most of the work. And behind them, the other competitors seemed to have nothing left to mount a real chase, signifying the harsh racing that had already occurred. To Vollering's credit, she led under the Flamme Rouge, and Van Vleuten must have been very intimidated by her sprint because she did not come through again. And instead of leaving it late, Annemiek van Vleuten attacked Demi Vollering extremely early to create a long, gutsy final sprint. They were neck and neck and pouring everything into that sprint, and Van Vleuten only had just enough to hold Vollering off for the win. Now, as said, the racing was hard and ferocious for the women this day, as it was for the men, as you are about to hear. But it seems to be clear now that if the weather is clear, the brutal difficulty of the Omloop racing does not translate across the TV to the viewing public, much like it does not at Liège-Bastogne-Liège. That is why brutal weather so enhances Omloop Het Nieuwsbald. It accentuates and exploits the brutality of the racing. It is the harrowing conditions that lead to crucial and early selections at Omloop that give it perfect, satisfying spice. For the bad weather conditions create technical errors that hold up half the peloton. They sap the energy and will of any rider not really feeling it this day. And they create a heightened aura of dramatic, cataclysmic northern racing that even Thor, Odin, and the other Asgardians would solemnly view as a prefigurement of their final doom to come at Ragnarok. Without the harsh storm clouds and freezing cold, Omloop Het Nieuwsbald's difficulty drops to a solid rung below that of E3 and even Ghent-Wevelgem. And I must sadly question if it is because of the significant far-flungness of the Kapelmuur and Bosberg. None of the other iconic climbs are close to it. The approach to these final two big hitters gives the riders too much time to get their breaths back. As iconic and photogenic as the Kapelmuur is, perhaps the Tour of Flanders organizers were ultimately correct to controversially adopt the Quermont-Paterberg finish instead. Similar to the women's race, the men's race still had a decent peloton at the base of the Muur and up the Kapelmuur. This was partially due to my theory that harsh conditions did not accentuate the gaps between the riders enough. This is partially due to the fact that the Jumbo-Visma Wasps were stinging and choking the legs off all the competition in service of their team leader, the champion of Belgium, the Swiss Army knife of the peloton, Wout van Aert. Jumbo-Visma's glaring lack of classic support for Van Aert was a negative storyline throughout last spring. Nathan van Hooydonk's Sam Gamgee-esque performance at Ghent-Wevelgem for Van Aert was the exception that proved the rule. But this year, Mike Teunissen was back healthy and fighting fit. Additionally, the newly signed Tiesj Benoot was very active and notable in this very first race for the Jumbo-Visma Wasps. But on this day, as they are destined to be all season, ultimately all of them were at the complete service of Wout van Aert. The Jumbo-Visma Wasps had Van Aert in perfect position into every sector of the race. Van Aert looked best on the Kapelmuur, totally in control, but he did not find any separation from the peloton, and no real selection was even made. Perhaps Wout was using this debut race of the season purely as a shock to the system to find his road legs again. Perhaps he was aware of the Omloop curse, how no winner of Omloop has ever gone on to win Flanders 6 weeks later. But then the peloton hit the Bosberg climb, and like Annemiek van Vleuten, Wout van Aert must have mentally said, "I think I shall make my winning move now." I must say, I've never liked the Bosberg because I did not think it was relatively tough enough for a last hurdle. Never once had I seen it actually decide a classic. Until this weekend. Wout van Aert absolutely demolished that idea from my head. He soared away like a great eagle of the misty mountains, in a complete league of his own. In this peloton were AG2R's Greg Van Avermaet and Oliver Naesen, Bahrain's European champion Sonny Colbrelli, UAE's Matteo Trentin, Groupama's Stefan Kung, Trek's Jasper Stuyven, and Ineos's Tom Pidcock, among many others. But none of them had an answer or a prayer to Wout van Aert's attack. Over the course of 600 meters, Wout van Aert, the champion of Belgium and the Swiss Army knife of the peloton, put a full 8 seconds into all of them, as if he were slicing bread. Over the top, some riders had teammates to empty themselves for the better sprinter, and many have gone well against the clock. but Wout van Aert's lead only grew. Neither I, nor few even in the race, can tell who took second place, for the victor oh so outshined them all like the sun does to all the other stars at noontime. Wout van Aert, the Swiss Army knife of the peloton, somehow tightened his already titanium iron grip on that moniker this day as he rode to victory at Omloop Het Nieuwsbald, his first road race of the year. He is the first rider in over 40 years to win Omloop on their season debut, and that is a stat that still does not reveal all the glory of the accomplishment. Back in the 1980s, Omloop Het Nieuwsblad was not nearly as prestigious as it is today. Back in the 1980s, Milan-San Remo was still the official start of the season, and Omloop was just a semi-classic rust duster affair. So, if it was difficult to win Omloop in your debut back then, so much the harder now after scores of riders already have double digits of race days in their legs in the fair weather South and in the Middle East. To get ahead of ourselves, Wout van Aert looked in such a class above the rest on the Bosberg, the thought crossed my mind that the Swiss Army knife might not lose a race this season, like he almost pulled off in his mini cyclocross season. Outlandish, of course, for surely an untimely mechanical will cost him a victory at some point this season as it did in Cross. But other than that, he looks invincible. No, Wout van Aert will not win every race he enters this year. But theoretically, like in Cross, he should only get better from here for the next 2 months. It seems his shafting of the U.S. Cyclocross Worlds is paying off already, which is good, but an Omloop win is not enough. It is an excellent additional arrow in his quiver collection of diverse prestigious wins. But for me, it is not yet enough to make up for the personal offense I took at him standing up Cyclocross Worlds. I said for him to make up for foregoing a world title served up to him on a platter, he had better win a cobbled monument and then some this spring. Well, he has already accomplished the then some this spring in his very first day of racing. The thought process behind the Omloop Flanders curse is the actual historical record fact that no one has won both in the same season, and that is generally assumed to be because it is too difficult to hold top form for 6 weeks straight. But what if Wout van Aert is not yet on top form? And who cares about historical records? Wout van Aert resets and rewrites them. Based on all reports, based on what are certain to be his top objectives, why would Wout already be on top form? Surely his biggest spring targets must be Flanders and Roubaix in April. It remains to be seen if Van Aert shall ride even stronger this spring. It remains to be seen if anyone else in the peloton can approach his level or form a cohesive coalition to bring him down like how Caesar was brought down by the jealous Roman senators. But Wout van Aert has started the season on the rightest of foots, and he has thrown down the largest of measuring sticks. And surely the only reason he did not win the next day's KBK was strictly because he did not start. But enough of the Vans victories. Back to the case at hand of discussing which is the superior opening weekend classic. In traditional Kuurne-Brussels-Kuurne fashion, we pick up halfway through the race. A halfway point that is nowhere near the mid-title town of Brussels. This year, the Flemish Classic daringly ventured out of Flanders into the French-speaking Wallonia. The idea sounded like social suicide for the Hardman Flandrian Classic. Be that as it may, I found the detour enjoyable since it kept the exact same character and complexion to the race. The Ineos Grenadiers pushed the pace with around 80 kilometers to go. The Jumbo-Visma Wasps were highly active and buoyed with confidence after helping their leader the day before to the perfect start of their Classics campaign. With 70 and then 60 kilometers to go, the attacks kept getting more and more ferocious as the peloton began significantly reeling in the early break of the day. Until finally, with 50 kilometers and change to go, the select group of favorites found a gap over the Kloisberg, the last categorized hill on course. Yes, this is the soft-spoken low-key beauty of KBK. The last significant climbing is finished with over 50 kilometers to go. The rest of the race becomes a teeter-totter balancing act to see if the win will come from the breakaway or the peloton behind. The select favorites caught the early break of the day to form a group of 17 at the front. The group included the likes of Nathan van Hooijdonk, the newly signed Tiesj Benoot, and the newly signed Christophe Laporte for the Jumbo-Visma Wasps. The cyclocross world champion Tom Pidcock and the beloved Ecuadorian Jonathan Navarez, both of the Ineos Grenadiers. An author's note, go back and listen to last year's opening weekend recap to find where Navarez's admiration began. Former KBK winner Casper Asgreen represented Quick-Step Alpha Vinyl up front. Spanish Classics hope Ivan Garcia Cortina made the split for Movistar. Groupama's time trialist Stefan Kuhn continued riding on his flying form to make this break. UAE's hardman sprinter Matteo Trentin was there, and Bike Exchange's Turbo Durbo Luke Durbridge was already out there for much of the day with Intermarché's beloved Taco van der Hoorn. An author's note, go back and listen to last year's Giro Stage 3 recap to find out where the taco admiration began. The day, Taco Tuesday, came a day early. There were others in the break, but that is enough, for the headline sprinters behind must be named in a similar phone book fashion. Hardily working on the front of the peloton, only 50 seconds behind was Israel Premier Tech for their sprinter Giacomo Nizzolo. Soon to the front came Alpecin Phoenix in the hope of bringing it back for their sprinter Tim Merlier. And with Alpecin came the Lotto Soudal team working for Caleb Ewan, one of the most established sprinters in the cycling world. Additionally, though they did not work, for their Alpha Wolf teammate Asgreen was nestled in the break, the Quick-Step Wolfpack had in their ranks the red-hot-handed Fabio Jakobsen if it all came back together for the sprint. So, there are the two sides of the teeter-totter, but the balancing act does not end there. It would be a stretch to say the breakaway had a tenuous alliance to hold off the peloton behind. 3 Jumbo Wasps, 2 Ineos Grenadiers, other individual riders sitting on with fast sprinters behind. The breakaway lacked cohesion to even begin a real rotation. Their lead sank from a mere 50 seconds at 50 kilometers to go down to a scanty 22 seconds with 35 kilometers to go. Behind in the peloton, Israel Premier Tech, Alpecin Phoenix, and Lotto Soudal were all committed to the chase and burning out multiple of their riders to bring this all back. But in classic KBK fashion, this race was not yet over. Movistar's best hope was already in the breakaway. Ivan Garcia Cortina had no plans of getting caught anytime soon. He attacked his breakaway companions that lacked cohesion. The attack gave the breakaway new life and impetus. 1 or 2 bridging over turned into 8 or 10 bridging over and riding harder, while 2 or 3 with fried legs were swallowed up by the peloton. And suddenly, with 30 kilometers to go, the gap had shot back up to 38 seconds. Do you see what I mean when I compare Kuurne to a teeter-totter? So this process continued oh so very deep into the race. After 5 to 10 kilometers of impetus, right when it seemed the break had found its groove, cohesion was lost and they shipped a precious dozen seconds of their lead to the menacing peloton behind. Only for one daring rider in the break to attack and revitalize the break's impetus as they all bridged and shedded the deadweight riders. With each injection of pace and shedding of riders, the break's firepower decreased, and the peloton ultimately slowly inched closer as the gap fluctuated like a heavily day-traded stock. Often it was the last attacker that was then dropped at the next counterattacking surge and injection of pace. This continued throughout all the zigzagging streets of Kortrijk to the first passage of the finish line in Kuurne. With 13.6 kilometers to go for the final bell lap circuit of the race, the breakaway had whittled all the way down to 3 men. Fastman Christophe Laporte representing his new Jumbo-Visma Wasp team well. Beloved Jonathan Navarez the Grenadier, and heroic Taco van der Hoorn for Intermarché, who had been in the break for the entire day. But the writing had already seemed on the wall for them for kilometers already. For only 8 seconds behind, the whole peloton was massing and storming. But even here, our fun riding on the teeter-totter was far from incomplete. At only 8 seconds away, the peloton could almost reach its arm and grab the brake by its shoulder. But with still 13 kilometers to go, perhaps it was too soon for the sprint trains to do just that. And yet surely some swashbuckling hopeful would at least dare roll the dice to chance changing sides on the teeter-totter and bridge up to the break. I tell you, over the course of the whole 13 kilometers, not one rider tried the bridge. Most likely, it is because half the peloton was working for a heavyweight sprinter, but more so, the pace must have been too high for anyone else to even try. Yes, for the entire 13 kilometers, the trio dangled out there ahead of the peloton. Should one of the trio have glanced back, he would have seen the whites of the eyes of the riders in the peloton, and those in the peloton would have seen his. An author's note: I know sponsor sunglasses ruin this fact, but just go with it. It makes the story more dramatic. Narvaez was in the exact similar escape position exactly 1 year ago, riding the coattails of the one who earned the Renaissance Madman nickname that very day. Taco van der Hoorn had rode solo to victory in similar wild circumstances at the Giro last year, and Christophe Laporte, who was the better sprinter on paper between them, looked on great form and up to the task of continuing the Jumbo-Visma success. The zigs and zags of Kortrijk played to the perfect advantage of the break, as they always do, and it was not until about 3 kilometers to go that the sprint trains in the peloton could really even form up and mass to the front. With 1 kilometer to go, many of the sprinters and their lead-out men were still out of position, and no matter how much some of the sprinters' teams did, still Taco and Narvaez and Laporte held strong, dangling out front. The trio perfectly swished through the last left turn on the course with 500 meters to go, while the peloton tightened and jammed to squeeze through it. It was a straight shot to the line from there for the trio, who had been finally and entirely working in perfect unison for this whole last bell lap. But so tired and spent were they. None of them could afford to wind their sprint up early, or else they would simply sputter out. While behind, it was already within the realm and territory of the final lead-out men to be ramping up their highest speeds possible with their headline sprinters and their slipstreams. Because of the trio out front, the sprinters all had to wind up their final kicks early and from far out. While out front, Christophe Laporte left his as late as possible. Laporte launched his sprint and Taco dug in to stay in his slipstream, but the impetus of the sprinters was too much to be denied. Like scorching meteors with flaming tails of fire, the headline sprinters flew past Laporte and Taco in the fading Narvaez in the last 50 meters. It was a clean and fair sprint, and it took every fiber of their beings and a bike throw to win it. But out on top was the Quick-Step Wolfpack's Fabio Jakobsen, ahead of the pocket rocket Caleb Ewan of Lotto Soudal. It was yet another fabulous edition of Kuurne-Brussels-Kuurne, a race that so often unexpectedly delivers. For the teeter-totter balancing act is so finely precise, it is unbelievably comical how for 50 kilometers, everyone is on such touch-and-go pins and needles, watching to see if the race will come back together for the sprint between the Goliaths, or if the break of Davids can indeed yet again heroically deny them. It is just a bike race after all. Or, after such intense viewing, is it? Finally, to briefly make a decision after reviewing this year's opening weekend, I think on their best days, it is fair to call Omloop Het Nieuwsbald and Kuurne-Brussels-Kuurne tied for great spectacles. But now, I think I am ready overall to give the edge to KBK. Whereas it is now apparent Omloop needs harsh weather to have its best day, KBK is proving to be a reliable, literally rain or shine, bulletproof, unpredictable belter of a bike race year after year. Alright, sorry I spent so much time talking about Wout. He's, alright, unapologetically. Alright, I just said sorry, so maybe apologetically. Anyways, he's my favorite rider of the current time because he's never say die, always fights on, exciting to watch. He's in the club, you know, you get it at this point if you listen to my stuff. You do actually know. I'm not just saying you know. You guys know. So Swiss Army knife for the peloton. That hasn't been so embraced since literally Eddie Merckx, which is unbelievable accomplishment at this point. So, anyways, that's the one thing. But then, yeah, that was the diversion mid recap, and yeah, the real story was Adam Blythe's right. KBK's better. Omloop Het Nieuwsbald is the second most anticipated race of the year after the Tour de France, but oh my gosh, KBK is a better race. It's crazy. It's awesome. That is the finely balanced teeter-totter if ever I've frickin' seen one. That was great. I don't know. Hopefully everything else kind of spoke for itself. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Hopefully this was a good recap. Hopefully this is a way to commemorate and immortalize the weekend and what we saw here. So maybe it's not. That was my attempt anyways, though. And yeah, Well, thanks for listening, everybody. Find the blog post. Follow me on... Well, just subscribe to the show on whatever podcast app, YouTube. Leave comments, 5-star reviews. Thanks for listening, everybody. Vive le cyclisme.